Hi, Jake Williams from Edition InfoSec here. I wanted to touch on a topic that I'm sure most of you saw in the news in the last 24 hours, and that's that Microsoft is buying GitHub, or has announced the intention to acquire GitHub. I'm sure that there's still some legal whatevers to work out there, but there's been a big push in the security community and the open source community over the last 24 hours talking about the general sentiment seems to be what a bad move this is. I'm going to kind of step out of the box here a little bit and take a little bit of a counterculture move, counterculture opinion on that, on that side. Those that are saying that it's going to be horrible for open source and horrible for open source security, I'm not sure that I follow the arguments. I mean, I understand the actual argument itself. I understand what the claim is. I'm not sure that I agree with the argument, maybe the better way to put it. So let me kind of break down, where we're at and what we're talking about here. So for those that don't know, GitHub is a large repository, or a large code repository that allows for revision control, as well as searching and analysis and collaboration. In some cases, even with a GitHub's Gist feature, you could almost consider that to be kind of a social networky kind of thing. You can, as a developer, you can upload these Gists. I'll talk about those a little bit later here. They're less from a revision control standpoint. You'd almost think about it like Twitter, but for code, right? Meaning that now, of course, it's not strictly limited to code. You could post literally anything there, obviously, within GitHub's guidelines. But again, it could be any type of data in a gist. So I want to walk through a couple of the arguments, and then talk about why I think why Microsoft announced the purchase of GitHub, as well as why is GitHub selling in the first place. So let's start with the whole big open source or big security community issues and concerns here. Of course, security and privacy tend to go hand in hand. So many in the security community are also very worried about the privacy aspect of this. I do understand those concerns, definitely, up front. I think it's important to remember that GitHub has two models today. There's the unpaid repo, which is a public repository that you can then load on GitHub, and anybody then can download and view your code. There's also the private repository side. This is where people pay to host their own code. By the way, one of GitHub's large customers, they have several very large customers. One of their large customers is Microsoft itself. So Microsoft has been storing code on GitHub on a private repository. They have a couple of publics as well, but I think the majority of the stuff they're storing in GitHub, although we don't have good stats on this, is very likely in private repositories that they're paying for. All right, so again, we have the option to make a repository private. Again, as long as we pay for that through GitHub. So now there's the concern that because your code is there and now Microsoft owns GitHub. By the way, actually, probably something to hit on here as well is that GitHub doesn't offer an open searching engine, where, for instance, you can say, show me all projects on GitHub that contain the following package, right? Of course, you can hack that together a little bit with some Google foo, or I guess now that Microsoft's buying GitHub, maybe some Bing foo. No, seriously, coming back around on that. Nobody uses Bing. Coming back around on that, seriously, yes, there isn't that search functionality there, but of course, GitHub themselves have the ability to go search the repositories. We know this because GitHub has started a project where they're basically notifying people of the use of outdated NPM. Node package manager, the NPM, as well as Ruby gems. So if they're using an outdated Ruby gem or outdated NPM package, known vulnerable outdated package in their projects, GitHub will automatically notify those users and let them know, hey, you should probably update your packages. And so when this came out last year, this was seen as a huge violation of privacy. And of course, I'll link to this in the in the video. But I understand where that became this huge violation of privacy. People are like, what is GitHub doing searching through all of my repositories, even though they're public, or in some cases they were private? What are they doing searching through my repositories and telling me about vulnerabilities? I have to step back and say, well, I understand the privacy argument of this. Again, you ultimately are signing up for that as part of the terms of service. We're signing up for them to analyze that for statistics, etc., as part of the terms of service. And again, part of that could be that they're identifying security vulnerabilities. I would say then the overall response, and of course we don't have good stats outside of GitHub on how successful GitHub has been in notifying people and then influencing change, right? I mean, obviously notifying somebody of a vulnerability from a security perspective really only matters if it entices them to change or drives that change in some way. So then do they update that package? I have to say that it's net positive from my perspective on the on the use of or the idea of notifying people about these. So I don't really have an issue with this the way some people do. But again, I also am not naive enough to claim I don't understand the issues. I see where people are at here. I see why this concerns them. The GitHub. Doing that back-end search piece, because you have to step back and ask yourself, again, if they've done that search to know, why just NPM and Ruby gems, right? I have a hard time believing they didn't look at other packages, other languages, and say, well, could we identify, and there are probably other projects in the works we don't know about. Likewise, the GitHub data is the world's richest repository, I believe, of open source code. They know who's working on projects, when they're working on projects, a fascinating study that again, we don't have the data for, but GitHub absolutely does, is to know, based on the time of day, right, in a particular location, when are more bugs checked in, right? Are they mostly checked in, vulnerabilities or security vulnerabilities mostly checked in right before bedtime? Are they likely checked in right in the morning? I mean, there's some amazing studies that can be done here. And by the way, I have no doubt that GitHub is working on some of these. I also have no doubt that Microsoft, when they acquire GitHub, likely is going to do some of these studies. Microsoft does some amazing research that they give back to the community. And I for one, will be very excited to see some of that research come out from Microsoft themselves. So my fear of Microsoft having the, quote, keys to the kingdom to go search my repositories, I'm not really concerned about this, right? So this is something that is not concerning me greatly. Again, I know a number in the security community are very, very concerned about this. And again, have been talking about basically pulling out of using GitHub. In fact, GitLab this morning, a competitor-ish to GitHub, crashed actually under load. Basically was showing 500 errors unavailable, likely because of load. There have been some graphs showing the number of projects being imported into GitLab, and okay, cool, I get it. Look, there's some people that just can't handle Microsoft controlling the back end, the back end for that code. The second big concern that I keep hearing is that besides Microsoft looking at the code for research purposes, is that, and I think it's probably these two are very tightly related, is that Microsoft may steal this open source code and repurpose it for their own. Unless your code is, let me separate this very quickly too. If your code's in an open repo right now, you have that fear today. That's just the reality of it. I mean, does Microsoft have better access to search once they own and control GitHub? Yeah, totally. But the reality is, if you're in an open repo today, Microsoft could just as easily steal your code. If you're in a closed repository, I mean, I sort of understand the concern. I just have a hard time believing that Microsoft is going to actively steal wholesale from developers. That seems like a bridge too far for me. I'm not going to fashion a hat out of tinfoil here, although I can totally see where that could happen. Right? I just sort of step back and say, okay, I get it. I get the concern. One of the questions that you kind of have then is, if you had a private repo checked into GitHub and you delete that repo, is it really even deleted, right? Will your terms of service say so? Again, if that's really the concern, totally get it. By the way, I do believe today if you delete a repo, everything is deleted. New terms of service may say otherwise, right? Let's come around to why is GitHub selling in the first place, right? GitHub has lots and lots of members. Tons of members, as a matter of fact, and the why are they selling in the first place really comes down to money. They've posted some losses. I think 66 million in Q3, Q4, something of 2016. And you start looking at the losses versus the revenue. Losses are huge. They've been looking for been missing some leadership for significant periods of time in different positions, and they're venture capital based, right? So look, once a VC comes in, venture capital comes in and funds a project, funds a company, those capitalists, the venture capital folks that are putting their money in, have to get their money back out, right? That's a big driver. It's always a driver. When we select products and assist clients in selecting products at Rendition InfoSec, one of the things that we ask, this is something we ask right up front, is this company that you're looking at VC founded, right? Or sorry, VC funded. Because if it's VC funded, venture capital funded, that project is going to sell. There's almost zero chance that project doesn't sell to somebody else. Again, the goal is get in, get out, right? Get in, get out, get rich, I guess, probably for the VC side, right? So they invest in products that they believe, are going to be sold at a profit to the market. Well, that means they have to sell, right? And usually there's a 5 to 7 year clock going on, 5 to 7 year clock going on, and when they hit that point of diminishing returns where they can't, where they no longer project additional revenue, additional valuation coming in, that's generally when they sell. So here we have the scenario where GitHub is losing money, basically running out the clock on capital raise, and Microsoft came in, I believe, for $7.5 billion is the number, came in to do the buyout. Right? Again, this is ginormous for them, and again, from GitHub's standpoint, GitHub was going to sell to somebody. I don't think there was any question about that. At the moment, they have not created a sustainable profit model on their own. They obviously have one in the future. There's no question long term that GitHub can be profitable, or that centralized source code repositories such as GitHub can be profitable. But they were using the freemium model, which is really hard to monetize. It's good for VC, where you've got a lot of backing and you got a lot of money coming in. But that freemium model is give it away for free and hope that people buy subscriptions for additional features. And by and large, for the people that I know, and again, this isn't necessarily the larger enterprises using GitHub because they don't want to manage their own versioning control, as well as collaboration suites. Majority of people I know aren't paying for GitHub. They're using it, but they're not paying for the service. Of course, this creates problems, right? And the reality is, unlike Dropbox, let's say Dropbox, for instance, is another great freemium type model. In that, or Gmail even, right? In that particular case, they give you enough to whet your appetite to get you going. A couple gigs of free storage, but if you really want to up the you want to make it usable, right? What you really need then are is a paid account, right? And if you don't get a paid account, then really you don't have enough space to do what you need to do, right? So so GitHub versus versus them. Again, in this particular case, the GitHub, it is, unless you need a lockdown project, if your stuff is going to be open source anyway, there really isn't a reason there really isn't a reason to go buy a subscription to GitHub. So again, they kind of have that problem there, that their freemium model is good, but it's almost too good. There's not a lot there short of commercial projects that would force someone to want to go buy basically buy a subscription, right? So again, freemium model wise, I understand where they're having trouble. Let's come back to why does Microsoft want this, right? I'm going to throw the conspiracy theories out here. We've kind of already discussed some of those and kind of where I stand on those. But let's talk about the fact that Microsoft is practicing, I think, good enterprise software assurance. Right, by making this purchase. Microsoft has a lot of code on GitHub. Exactly how much in private repositories, and exactly how much is in private repositories is a matter of, I think, of some conjecture. What Microsoft's current bill to GitHub is yet another point of conjecture. Meaning, how much are they paying GitHub for the privilege of storing their code there? The fact of the matter is that Microsoft has made significant investments in using GitHub as part of their architecture. And the reality is that shifting off of that is going to cost Microsoft some amount of money. I have no doubt that the amount of code that they already have in GitHub and their likely cost to transition it away from GitHub is definitely a reason. Definitely a reason that they would consider buying and may ultimately have. That may have been the driving factor. Of course, we don't know what the driving factor necessarily is, but that certainly was, I have no doubt, a factor. A couple of folks that I've noted on Twitter have said, hey, at least it wasn't Facebook or Google that bought GitHub. And I guess in the hierarchy of evil companies now, somehow Microsoft is no longer number one, right? So hey, rock on. I get that, but step back away here and kind of step back for a second. And I think it's pretty easy to see that again, Microsoft really has to look at that as well, right? There's no question, again, GitHub was on the table to be purchased. They were going to be purchased. They're a VC-backed company. And Microsoft now has significant investment in private repositories in GitHub, has to step back and ask themselves as an organization with $7.5 billion to burn, right? Because, I mean, Microsoft, like many other companies, practically some big companies, Apple, Google, etc., practically print money. Right, and so they have $7.5 billion to burn. Is GitHub a good investment? And if so, does that investment or does part of that investment include the actual cost of them lifting and shifting to a new corporate repository type? And I think the answer is yeah. Finally, I'll throw in there. Microsoft gives away a community edition of Visual Studio. This is phenomenal. Look, for years when I was coming up, it was difficult to get a free featured compiler, right? An integrated development environment. The compiler, command line compiler is easy. An IDE, no, not so much, right? There really wasn't a freemium model on that. And Microsoft absolutely does that. Currently, they have Visual Source Safe is one of their, for their premium, for the premium customers, is one of the ways that they help folks do, do source repositories. I would have, it would not surprise me a bit. I have very little doubt that Visual Source Safe is going to die on the vine once Microsoft owns GitHub. And it won't surprise me at all to see Microsoft integrate even their community editions of Visual Studio back to what previously has been a community edition of GitHub. So I guess kind of thinking about this, why did Microsoft do it? Do we have like horrible, nefarious plans in place? No. I would also mention that we've seen some GitHub projects used for command and control of malware. Microsoft has an active threat intelligence and malware investigation cell. Again, there's a lot of uses and research too. Microsoft publishes a lot of research for all of the bad corporate Microsoft speech that we hear in security today. Look, the reality is they publish some groundbreaking stuff. They publish some of my favorite research that I talked with customers, whether that's from what's the efficiency gained when you buy multiple or have multiple monitors on a system, and I think we all know the answer to that is you get some efficiency gain, but how much and how many monitors? Again, I don't think really anybody knew until Microsoft came in and did that research. There's a ton of other research they contribute to, from security to certainly usability to, and yes, they've had their faux pas here and there, but alas, again, this isn't something that's keeping me up at night, right? So alas, I want to come back around, and kind of come full circle. From a threat model standpoint, because I think anybody who knows me knows I'm a big threat modeling person. What's your risk here with staying on GitHub? I would say that you already had a risk by putting your stuff on GitHub in the first place, right? You accepted a risk that you were working with a VC-funded organization that was almost certainly going to sell, and was going to sell to an unknown party who would make unknown terms of service changes, right? So you already accepted a risk there, right? And as you make a transition, if you decide a transition is appropriate for you, and I'm not necessarily saying it is, but as you make a transition, start evaluating that risk, right? If you move to another company, are they also VC funded? What does their runway look like? Meaning, how much VC, how much of that capital do they have left? How much runway do they have? Put those as part of your considerations, right? Because they absolutely should be. So that's one piece. I would say, let's evaluate how proprietary is your code, and what do you think the risk is that Microsoft would actually steal your code? Because the technical ability to do it, and the actual we're going to go do it are two completely different things, right? Is your code unique enough that you could detect the type of reuse of your code in Microsoft's own algorithms? Is your code unique enough in your private repo that you should be applying for a software patent that would protect you anyway, whether Microsoft steals it or not? Again, I don't think that's a realistic risk, but everybody should evaluate that as part of your risk model. So again, those are all things that I'd be thinking about. And again, probably my biggest piece would be, if somebody says this is a problem, somebody in my organization says to me, hey Jake, we can't put our stuff on GitHub anymore because Microsoft bought them. My first question to them is going to be, okay, articulate to me the set of risks that you believe are going to happen, and then we're going to document those on our risk register. Right? If you don't have a risk register in your organization, talk to us. Certainly we can help you build one of those. Again, I want to document these risks, and then I want to evaluate what is the likelihood of these risks? This is part of what you do with risk assessment. Evaluate what's the likelihood of these risks, what's the potential damage from these risks, and what's the cost for mitigating these risks, right? Because simply moving your code to some other repository or some centralized control system or insourcing that, certainly Git is free. You could insource all of that. There's a reason that people, it's not easy by the way, there's a reason that people have been tying into GitHub for so long, right? So anyway, I'll go ahead and close it out there and say that, look, from our perspective, we're not advising clients to immediately move their code. Rendition InfoSec, we're not advising that. We don't believe that Microsoft is likely to steal code We think that overall that this is going to prompt better security research. Microsoft definitely has a focus on security. They are the people that effectively invented the SDLC. I mean, I know there was lots of academic writing on it. If you don't want to say invented, they're definitely the first large company to operationalize it. Microsoft does a lot of great security research. I think this is going to be net positive for the overall community. While I understand that some people are going to be impacted by this because it's going to be an unacceptable threat model, again, this isn't victim shaming, but you have to recognize that you took a risk storing your stuff with a VC-backed company. And any time that you do that, you have to understand that VC-backed company is eventually going to sell to a new company who has unknown terms of service. As you evaluate whatever your replacement is, understand that that's something that's going to be a piece there. Anyway, I'll go ahead and close that out. Jake Williams from Edition InfoSec signing off.